Okay, here we are today at the river and we're going to make a FlowTracker measurement. Okay, inside the FlowTracker case we have everything that we need to do to make the measurement. Here's my tagline that I'll use today, the stakes to secure it. I've got a spare set of batteries and a Phillips head screwdriver that I can use to open the battery case in the back of the FlowTracker. I also have the top setting weighting rod and the FlowTracker itself. Okay, now we're going to go out and find a section to measure. The first thing I'm going to do is put my waders on, and then of course, because I'm working out over water, to be safe, I'm going to put my life vest on. Let me put my life vest on. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to pick out a section to make our FlowTracker measurement. We're coming back to our gauging station, so we already have a pretty good idea of where we want to measure. But let's just talk about this section of the river right now. What I'm standing beside is a natural control, and the site I'm probably going to select today is just upstream of this site, just because the flow patterns are more stable and more uniform. You can see along the river there's a lot of vegetation along the sides. What I want to do is make sure that I'm kind of out of the vegetation, because the FlowTracker is not going to work well there, and have a nice clear section of flow. Just a few comments about when we string up a tagline. There's always a couple ways that we can do it. We can stake it to the ground, or we can tie up to trees. One important thing when we're making the FlowTracker measurement itself is that we would try always to make sure that our tagline is perpendicular to flow. So when we set up the tagline, we want to make it nice and secure and tight and have it as perpendicular to flow as possible. Another comment about the tagline, as you notice, I'm not starting at zero. In this case, when I'm looking downstream, this will always be the right bank and this will be the left bank. So my tagline, my starting point for my right bank will be right at about 3.9 meters, okay? And on my ending station, it looks like it's going to be somewhere around 6.6 meters. So we don't have to exactly start on zero. We can just set the tagline up and just reference whatever the tagline reads to the edge of water, okay? So now that we have our tagline set up, we want to check out the FlowTracker and the conditions for our measurement. So we're going to start obviously by turning the sensor on. And I'm going to go to number 2, System Functions. The first thing I'm going to want to do is to make sure that I have enough recorder space, so I can press number 2. Okay, it says that I have 2 files recorded and 62 files left. Okay, so that's plenty of space. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to check the battery data, because of course we want to have enough battery data to make the entire measurement. So I press number 5, and it does a real quick calculation. The battery voltage is 11.9 volts. It does calculations based on if your batteries are alkaline, nickel metal hydride, or nickel cadmium batteries. You can see we have a fresh set of batteries in here, so they're all reading 100%. So I can press enter. The next thing that I'm going to want to check is temperature data. We have a temperature sensor located in the probe itself. We use that in the speed of sound calculation that computes the velocity, so that's a very important parameter to measure. And I've immersed the FlowTracker actually in the water to give it a few minutes to equilibrate. A comment I should make about that is that if you have the FlowTracker sitting in a hot truck that might be 35 or 40 degrees C, and you bring it to the water that might be 10 or 15 degrees C, it's going to take some time to equilibrate. So immerse it in the water, give it a few minutes, and then we can press number 4, and we see that we're reading 24.1 degrees centigrade, which seems reasonable. The next thing we're going to check out is we're going to look at the raw velocities. That's the X and the Y velocities and the S and R values. The S and R, which is signal to noise ratio, they're very important for any type of acoustic Doppler measurement. For the FlowTracker, we would prefer the values to be up, S and R values to be around 10. They can operate normally to values as low as 4. Okay, so I'm going to press number 6 to measure raw velocities. You can see I have a Vx, which is the X, the downstream component, and a Vy, which is the lateral component. My SNR for beam 1 is fluctuating between 16 to 17 to 20, and I see similar fluctuations. Actually, fluctuations of SNRs are okay. It doesn't affect the velocity accuracy. Again, what we're really interested is values to be at least 10 or above, and if conditions are really minimal, we can accept actually values above 4. Okay, the last thing that we're going to want to do is we want to make sure that we set our system clock. So we can do that by pressing number 9, or we can change the date and the time. I see that I have the correct date here, and I actually have the correct time. That's correct with my watch. The last pre-deployment test is optional, but it's number 7, called the Auto QC test. The Auto QC test basically samples the beam, an automatic beam check. I also have this ability to do this automatic beam check during the measurement itself, but I'll perform one here right now. So I press 7, it asks me to run the test or to skip the test. So I'll press 1, and it gives me the instructions. It says put the probe away from any underwater objects. Press enter to start. This is going to take about 30 seconds, and once the test is complete, it's going to give me a pass or a fail. Okay, the test is complete. It said all results are good. No warnings found. Press enter. Okay, so now I'm ready to start my discharge measurement. I'm going to go through a few quick setup parameters. My averaging time, number 2, is set to 40 seconds. My units is set to metric. If I want to change either of those, I just press the number, and the measurement mode is discharge. Number 4 is my QC settings. Number 5 is the discharge settings. That's if I want to make a midsection or a mean section type measurement. Number 6 is my salinity, which is set at 0. And then the language, which is set for English right now. I'm going to press 0 to go back to the main menu, and now I'm ready to start my data run. Let me talk quickly about setting up the rod or using the rod and the FlowTracker when we're making the measurement. Orientation is very important. The orientation should always be perpendicular to the tag line. The FlowTracker doesn't have a compass inside of it, and so we need to fix its orientation during the measurement. Now we're actually ready to make a data run or start our discharge measurement. I'm going to press number 3. The first thing that comes up is it's going to ask me for the name of the site. So I'm going to press 1, and I can put in up to 8 alphanumeric characters. And number 2 is the file extension. Typically I use that as the measurement number, so in this case we'll call it 001. The operator, JVS, that's me, that's the initials. And it says press QC menu at any time for the gauge data.
A few comments about the gauge data. There's 5 parameters when we input the gauge data. The first one is water level, then rated Q, time, location, and any comments you want to make about the site at that time. You can hit QC menu and input the gauge data at any time during the measurement. It's not really a requirement. It's strictly for documentation purposes, and it will not affect the results.
In this case, we're in a natural stream. We don't have a water level recorder here or a discharge rating, so we can just leave those fields blank. They won't affect your measurement at all. The next, again, what I ran it previously is the QC test. I'm going to skip it for right now and get on to the measurement. So when I start my measurement, the first thing I want to do is go to my starting edge. And the starting edge of water, in this case, is 3.9 meters.
A comment about subdividing the river for a discharge measurement. We divide the river into subsections to get a better representation of the velocity, the depth, and the area. Typically, 20 stations are recommended, keeping the flow within each subsection within 5%. These subsections can be of equal width, going across the river, or they can be of unequal width. An example where you would want to use an unequal width subsection is if your flow is gathered in the center part of your river. In this case, you would use wider subsections along the edges and narrow the subsections as you approach the higher flow section in the river.
Okay, so now I'm at my starting edge, and first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my location. I'm going to read the tagline. The tagline reads, at the very edge of water is at 3.90 meters. So I press set location and enter 3.90 meters. The next thing that I'm asked to select is the left edge or the right edge of water. I'm going to press the toggle LEW/REW. For REW means right edge of water. The next thing I need to set is the depth. In some cases, the depth will be 0 at your starting edge, but in this instance, there is actually a depth at the starting edge, which I'll read with my wading rod. Okay, on my wading rod, it reads 0.13 meters. So I press set depth, and I enter in 0.13 meters. And now it says press next station to begin. So I've put in my location, I've set the orientation to be starting on the right edge of the water, I've set my depth, and I'm ready to press next station. So now I'm going to my first location. In this case, because I'm at 3.9, I'm going to start at 4.05. So I put set location, and I enter in 4.05. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the depth. I set the rod at 4.05, and my depth is right at 0.2 meters. So set depth, 0.2 meters. And now it asks me to it says press measure to begin, but I have to make sure that I'm using the correct velocity method to determine mean velocity. So there's many methods that use to determine what the mean velocity is. In this case, we're going to use the 6/10 because we're in very shallow water. On the set method, you can see a plus sign, and I just toggle this until it says 0.6. Okay, I've set it at the 6/10 depth. I have to position myself so I won't obstruct the flow velocity, and I press measure to begin. Okay, so now our measurement is complete, and it gives me a velocity reading of 0.032 meters per second. I have a velocity variation of 1/1000th of a meter per second, an angle of 2 degrees, an SNR value of 18. The spikes were 0, and the boundary was best. Okay, I have the ability to accept or repeat. Everything looks in line to me, so I'm going to accept the measurement and go to the next location. The FlowTracker remembers the actual width that we use for this station, and for the next station, it's going to add that width to where I'm at. So what I'm reading right now, as I press next station, it says station 2, location 4.2. So I'm going to position the rod at 4.2 meters. Again, I'm going to read the depth. The depth is at 0.2 meters, which is what I had before. And again, it brings the same depth over from the previous measurement. The 6/10 method. So actually everything should be in place. I'm going to press measure. While I'm actually making the measurement, again, because the instrument can't sense its own motion, it's very important that I keep it stable. Don't angle it during the measurement. That'll create some error. Also, if there's any debris floating down, I want to make sure that the debris stays off the probe head. Again, any debris that collects along the probe, number one, will disturb the velocity measurement, but also it can contaminate the signal. It can get in the sample volume and contaminate the signal. Okay, so now my measurement's complete. My velocity reading was 0.026. The variation of velocity was 1/1000th of a meter per second. The angle was 3 degrees. The SNR was 16.5. Spikes were 0, and the boundary was best, so I'll accept. Okay, now out to my station number 3, and I've got a depth of 0.39 meters. I'm going to set my location of 5.05, and my depth of 0.39 meters. And in this case, I'm going to change, because I'm getting a little deeper here, I'm going to change to the 0.2.8 method. So I do that before I make my first measurement, and I toggle method, and on the reading, on the display, it says 0.2/0.8. And it actually comes up in the measurement side, it says 0.2, 0.31. And so it's telling me that your first 2/10 measurement is to be made at a depth of 0.31. Okay? So I'm going to set it at 0.31 and press measure. So this is similar to the 6/10 measurement, except I'm taking a 2/10 and an 8/10 measurement. That measurement's from the water surface. And I'm going to take the 2/10 and the 8/10 and take the average and use that as my mean velocity. So I have about 15 seconds to go, so I still use the same averaging time for each point. For my 6/10 measurements, they were taking 40 seconds apiece, And now this will take 80 seconds because I'm measuring 40 seconds at the 2/10 and 40 seconds at the 8/10. All my parameters look good, my velocities look good. 1 to accept. Now it tells me to go to the 8/10 step. Read that on my rod. Okay, I'm ready. I'm in location. Everything looks good. Press measure. Okay, so my 8/10 measurement is done. I had a slight angle here of slightly larger angle of 11 degrees. That's probably because there's a lot of debris not debris, but there's a lot of cobbles and rocks on the bottom of the stream, and so that has a tendency to change the angles of flow. The good thing, the FlowTracker, as you know, can compensate for that and take only the X direction, but it's letting me know that yeah, there's a little bit of angled flow down there. The SNR values were a little bit higher. That's probably a function of being a little bit closer to the stream bed. The velocities were 0.007 meters per second with a variation of 0.001 or thousandths. So again, everything looks acceptable.
A comment about Smart QC. The FlowTracker records quality control parameters with every measurement. The quality control parameters include SNR, standard error velocity, the boundary QC, spikes, the flow angle, and the percent discharge. Each QC parameter has a preset threshold from the factory that can be adjusted or disabled according to your preference. At times during your measurement, you might get a warning message that the threshold has been exceeded. If you do, you'll be given the option to either accept it or repeat the measurement. Just prior to the end of the discharge measurement, a complete summary will be given to you, and again you'll have the opportunity to go back to that location and repeat the measurement. Finally, a complete summary of all QC warning thresholds are given in each FlowTracker report when you generate it.
We've just finished our last measurement, our last measurement, and it's time to end the measurement. We're going to do that by pressing in section. But before we press in section, we want to take a quick review of the data by pressing previous station. At this point, I can actually add or delete stations. If I want to add a station, I can just simply input the location that I want to add and then take the weighting rod back to that location. Say it's 3.3, measure the depth and complete a measurement just as I would. Once I've done the review, again by pressing previous station and then next station, I press in section. It's going to ask me, are you sure? Basically, I'm going to have to press it twice. So I'm going to press in section again, and now it gives me it asks me to give the edge distance and the depth. So I'm going to input the depth. The edge section is at 6.3. So I put the location of 6.3. And I'm going to measure the actual depth. Again, we have some depth here. .21. And now I'm going to press calculate discharge. Okay, once I hit calculate discharge, it's going to ask me, it's actually going to ask me twice if I want to calculate discharge. The reason it does that is that I have one last time to make a careful review of the depths and of the locations. At this point, because I've already pressed in section, I can't add or delete stations, but I can actually edit them. Once I hit calculate discharge, I can no longer edit them, so I want to make a careful review. So I've done the review by pressing previous station and next station. Things look good, and so I calculate discharge. And at this point, it's going to bring up some quality parameters, and basically the results of my measurement, or my measurement is complete, and my results are displayed on the screen.
After the data has been collected, we connect the FlowTracker to our PC with the serial cable provided. Then we use the FlowTracker software to download the data to our computer. This concludes the field portion of the FlowTracker demonstration video. For additional information about the FlowTracker or any other Sontek products, you can visit our webpage or contact customer support. Myself and all of Sontek YSI hope that this information has been helpful to get you started using the FlowTracker. We look forward to working with you in the future and wish you good success.